Hi everybody, welcome to this episode of Arcs Jason. It's great to have you with me. Today I got a great question from Tammy. Who is the Grand Master in Daoism? I like this sort of question. It's funny. But before I answer this question, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on all bell notifications. A lot of people always ask me, Jason, why does your work not reach a wider audience? With your help, it can. And if you enjoy my work, please head on over to my Patreon page. If you feel like my work helps you in any sense, then a small contribution is kindly appreciated. So let's get into Tammy's question about who is the Grand Master in Taoism. She actually says, who is the Grand Master in Taoism? Christianity have Jesus and Buddhism have the Buddha. Is there a prophet figure? Interesting question. And I think it's a lot. People think about it a lot because people think in Christian terms, right? A lot of Westerners think in Christian terms that there has to be some sort of avatar, right? An avatar, in the James Cameron sense, is a foreign concept, actually, in some sense, to a lot of Eastern thought. That idea of avatar has been superimposed onto Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, and so forth and so on. But that's kind of comes from Western thinking. That's a whole lengthier discussion, which I'm not going to cover here, but just to give you a little framework, right? So Taoism in and of itself is not as simplistic as Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, in the sense that there's a prophet figure. You know, we could say that Lao-tzu, right? We could say Lao-tzu. Lao-tzu was the original author of the Tao Te Ching, so like the foundational text of Daoism, and well, it's a dialogue between him and a god, but it's like that has become what Daoists would say is the foundational text. But I would disagree to a certain degree, because if we look at the whole Warring States period of China, there was an evolution of Daoist thought in that 400-year or so period, where you have Lao-tzu, Zhuang, and even Mencius contributed to Taoism. So when you read the Mengzi, when you read Mencius's text, you will come away from that and go, he's not Confucian, he's Daoist. I agree. Somehow he's lumped into Confucianism, but his teachings are Taoist. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. And so he has also contributed to Taoist thought. So when I think of Taoist texts, I often think of the Tao Te Ching, the Zhuangzi, the Hua Hu Qing. I think of and I think of the Mengzi, the Mencius. I think of those four texts, but you could also include in that also even the Confucian Analects, to give you kind of a basis of what Taoism is against, so to speak, is in opposition to, because Taoism itself is a critique of Confucianism, and a lot of people who are into kind of woo-woo interpretations of Taoism don't understand that. But if you understand Taoism authentically, then it's a critique of Confucianism, along with a lot of other things, but that's something we have to consider as well. So I think of all of those texts. I don't just think of Lao-tzu as the so-called prophet, or I like how you say Grand Master, like some sort of Freemason running Taoism. We have to also consider what a lot of scholars consider as well, is that Lao-tzu may not have even existed. There's no real evidence to suggest that there was an actual real man called Lao-tzu. We need to remember, Lao-tzu is not a name. It just means old man in Chinese. It's not even like a title. It just means like, did you see that old guy? The old guy with that wisdom. You know what I mean? That's what it's kind of alluding to. So that Lao-tzu is, what scholars suggest is, he was either an individual and a historical figure, or it was a group of people or a few people who created, or in some sense a community that was called or referred to as the Lao-tzu. So there's a lot of belief that the original Taoists were kind of like in some sense, sort of like hippies, and in air quotes, not like our modern hippies, but people who were living out of society and in nature and living a very natural and simplistic life. Like Lao-tzu, in some sense, like when we read the Tao Te Ching, is kind of against a lot of this progress with so-called progress, with Confucianism, where Confucianism is very like pious and, well-mannered and so to speak, but Lao-tzu sees right through that sort of gentleman culture because it is very hypocritical, and he does obviously explore that in the Tao Te Ching. And so that's why the Daoist way is kind of the simple way. The original Daoists were living on farms, still cultivating their own rice and making their own clothes. They were sticking to the unhewn wood, the natural way, so following nature, and not cultivating themselves. That's the carving and polishing metaphor that is related to Confucianism or Confucius, where we have to self-cultivate, which is very strange, right? From a Taoist perspective, it's strange because according to Taoism, we need to return to our raw nature because our raw nature is empty, spontaneous, and free. It's the socialization that has warped our nature. It's all of this culture and socialization that has encroached upon our natural way of being. But that's sort of getting away from the question that Tammy has asked here. But we need to get sort of a framework and an idea of sort of who Lao-tzu was or what Lao-tzu was. I take a classical perspective of this and just think of him as an historical figure because it's kind of simplistic and easy to, understand for people. Does that make him the prophet? No, it doesn't, because we have to take into consideration Zhuang-tzu. And when I think of the two greatest masters of Daoism, is Lao-tzu and Zhuang-tzu. We can throw Mencius in there, but if we're going for people who are categorized as Daoist, then we say Lao-tzu and Zhuang-tzu. And what you see in the Zhuang-tzu text is that is like Daoism. I don't even know what to say, like on steroids. It's such a beautiful book, and it accentuates Daoist thought. So it's kind of an elaboration on the Tao Te Ching, but it just typifies the beauty of Daoism, about how wonderful it is to follow the way of nature and the amazing boon it is when we return to our nature, which is in our modern world, we've gone so far away from our nature, our intrinsic nature, right? Our ability to just allow life to be and to understand ourselves and just to follow the way, follow life spontaneously with no interference or judgment of how life should be, right? So this is a Daoist mentality. And Zhuang-tzu accentuates that a lot in the Zhuang-tzu text. You have all these crazy stories with, the butcher ding and the swimmer and the robber. He uses this group of misfits to articulate Daoist thought. And it's still one of the greatest texts you'll ever read. For myself anyway, it's one of the greatest books, I think, known to man. But a lot of people don't know about it. But that's what really accentuates Daoist thought. And so when we think about a sole prophet or master in Daoism, we have to think of Lao-tzu and Zhuang-tzu, I feel. We have to think about those two specifically, but there's been so many masters since that time, right? So it's kind of like when you look at Buddhism, right? Like we have the Buddha, we respect the Buddha, right? All respect to Siddhartha Gautama, who is the historical Buddha. We have a lot of respect for the Buddha, but there's been so many Buddhas throughout history, right? So that's why there's a lot of respect in Buddhism for other Buddhas, right? So even like in places like in Thailand, where you have Ajahn Chah is respected as a Buddha. And if you're not familiar with Ajahn Chah, then I highly recommend going out and reading any of books about him or some of his teachings. An amazing individual. So Likewise, there's been many Lao-tzus and Zhuangzus, right? Throughout history, we don't know many of them, but we do know a few, right, down the line through history. So in Taoism, it's not so much respect or adoration or devotion to a master or a leader. It's really about just following the way. It's about following the way, the path, and following the Tao. Well, the way is the Tao, following the Tao. When you come into harmony with the Tao, you are one with the Tao, right? This is the idea. When you come back to your nature, you experience De. You come back to your natural virtue, and your power, or you become an extension of the Tao's power. It's that river analogy, right? When you're fighting the Tao, when you're going against the way of nature, you begin to drown and suffer and come into conflict with life, which is what we see in the world. But when you let go and you just allow the river to take you, you allow the Tao to do whatever is what it needs you for here in this existence, its power becomes your power, right? Its power becomes your power. And this is not just, not just some sort of fancy metaphor I'm using here. It's an actual reality when you start to follow that. I know that in my life, and I'm sure many of you do as well. When you let go of fighting life and you allow it to happen without interfering with anyone else, there's a grace in your life. They use that word in Shaivism. There's a grace in your life that guides your life in some sense. It doesn't. So using guide is implying that there's someone running the show. You are part of the Tao. You're just moving as the Tao. You are following the way. You are just going in that direction, wherever that takes you. We're all going in our own way, but we connect with that irreducible essence by letting go and allowing it to happen. So that's really the crux of Taoism. It's not so much about worshipping a prophet or having devotion to some sort of prophet. Even though we should respect Lao-tzu, Chuang-tzu, and even Mencius, these sorts of people who existed or may not have existed in Lao-tzu's case, and we ought to study the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuang-tzu a lot, intensely, and to keep our mind in that place. Those two texts, in my opinion, being two of the greatest texts in the world, are going to guide your life in a positive direction and keep your mind in resonance with the Tao without falling into this habit and that habit and so forth and so on, and falling for culture and all of that sort of stuff. So Tammy, I hope I answered your question there somewhat. It's a bit long-winded, but I really like this question. It was kind of fun to answer, and it is interesting because a lot of people do think that there should be some sort of, this Western thinking that there always should be some sort of prophet or avatar. When in the East, it's kind of like, well, first of all, that's a Western way of thinking. So you're thinking about it as a Western, and you're not thinking about it as an Easterner. And I have many videos on that sort of cultural difference. So that's for those sorts of videos if you're interested in those. So thank you for your question, Tammy. Really enjoy it. Hope you guys enjoyed that video today, and hope you're all doing well out there. Positivity, make sure a lot of positivity, a lot of peace. It's what we need in the world, people. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't be ashamed of being a peaceful person. All right? So, have a great day. Shanti, shanti, shanti.